steel jaws had gone through bone. Another hour, and he'd bleed out. Rowan Ash knelt in snow that came up to her thighs, her breath misting in air so cold it burned her lungs. The thermometer back at her cabin read -38 degrees Fahrenheit. Out here, 3.2 miles from anything resembling shelter, it felt colder. Cold that turned exposed skin black in 12 minutes. Cold that made your teeth ache just from breathing. The wolf was massive, 420 pounds easy. Black fur matted with blood and ice. Both hind legs caught in a bear trap someone had set illegally, the kind with teeth designed to hold a grizzly. Teeth designed to crush bone into splinters. But it was the eyes that made Rowan's stomach turn. Clouded white. Deliberately ruined. She'd seen this kind of damage once before years ago when a trapper brought in a dog whose eyes had been burned with heated silver. Not an accident. Not disease. Torture. The wolf's massive head turned toward her, those ruined eyes fixed on her voice like a drowning man grasping for shore. He should have been snarling, snapping, doing anything a trapped predator would do. Instead, he went perfectly still. Waiting. Rowan's hand hovered over the trap's release mechanism. One wrong move and those jaws would take her arm off at the elbow. Blind or not, a wolf this size could kill her in seconds. "Easy," she whispered, though she didn't know why. Wolves didn't understand words, but this one seemed to. His breathing slowed. The tension in his shoulders eased just a fraction. Rowan had survived 10 years alone in the Bitterroot Mountains by making smart choices. Walking away from a dying lichen would be the smartest choice she'd made all winter. 12 years ago, lichen warriors had burned her village to ash. Pinewood Ridge, Montana. 41 people dead, including her parents. The survivors scattered like leaves in a winter wind. She'd been 16 hiding in a root cellar while the world above her screamed and burned. She should leave this creature to die. Should let the Montana cold do what fire had done to her family. Clean. Final. Just. But those eyes. God, those eyes. Rowan gripped the trap's release lever with both hands. The mechanism was frozen solid ice crystals glittering in the weak afternoon sunlight filtering through the pines. She threw her weight against it. Nothing. Tried again. The metal groaned, but held. "Come on," she hissed through gritted teeth. Her fingers were already going numb despite her gloves. Another few minutes and she wouldn't have the strength to try. The wolf made a sound, not a growl. Something softer. Almost like a whine. Rowan pulled the small jar of rendered fat from her coat pocket. She always carried it for situations like this, though usually it was for frozen door hinges, not bear traps. She smeared the fat along the release mechanism, working it into the ice with fingers that barely responded to her commands. "One more time," she told the wolf. "If this doesn't work, I'm sorry." She pulled. The lever shifted. She pulled harder, putting her back into it, her boots slipping in the blood-soaked snow. The wolf's blood. Too much blood. He'd been here for hours, maybe longer. The trap released with a wet crack that echoed through the forest. Rowan flinched backward, expecting the attack, expecting jaws around her throat, claws tearing through her coat. Instead, the wolf collapsed sideways, too broken to even lift his head. Up close, she could see the full extent of the damage. The trap had gone through both legs just above the hocks. Bone fragments glinted white against red meat, an injury that would cripple even if he survived. And the scars. God, the scars. They covered his muzzle, his neck, his shoulders. Not the random marks of a hard life. These were deliberate, methodical. Someone had taken their time with this creature, had wanted him to suffer. Her own kind had done this. Lichen turned on lichen. Rowan should walk away, should let nature take what was already claimed. But she saw herself in those ruined eyes, cast out, left to die alone, forgotten by everyone who should have cared. She gripped the wolf's scruff with both hands and pulled. Dead weight. A mountain of blood and fur that carved a dark trench through virgin snow. Her shoulders screamed, her lungs burned. The cabin was 3.2 miles away. Downhill, thank God, but through terrain that would challenge her on a good day. With 420 pounds of dying wolf, it might as well have been on the moon. Rowan made it 20 feet before her arms gave out. She fell to her knees, gasping, her vision swimming with black spots. The wolf's breathing came in shallow bursts. Too shallow. "No," she said. "No, you don't get to die on me. Not after I just wrecked my hands getting you out of that trap." She pulled off her coat despite the cold, laid it flat in the snow, rolled the wolf onto it. The fabric wouldn't hold his weight for long, but it would slide easier than fur against ice. She tied the sleeves together to make a crude harness, looped it across her chest, and started walking. The first mile nearly killed her. Downhill should have been easier. Gravity should have helped. But controlling that much weight on a slope covered in ice and hidden rocks took every ounce of strength she had. Her boots slipped. She went down hard, slamming her knee into a buried stone. Pain exploded up her leg, white and sharp. The wolf slid past her, his momentum carrying him 10 feet before the harness jerked tight and dragged her after him. Rowan lay in the snow for a full minute, breathing hard, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. The cold crept through her shirt, through her skin, settling into her bones. This was how people died in the mountains. Hypothermia didn't announce itself. It just took you degree by degree until you stopped feeling the cold at all. She forced herself up, checked the wolf, still breathing, still unconscious. She adjusted the harness and kept moving. The second mile brought her to the frozen creek. Under normal circumstances, she'd have gone around. The ice looked thick enough, but you never trusted ice in the Bitterroots. Streams ran over rocks and rapids, creating thin spots that could give way without warning. But going around meant adding another half-mile to the journey, and she could feel her strength fading. The wolf's breathing had grown even shallower. If she didn't get him to the cabin soon, this whole nightmare would be for nothing. Rowan stepped onto the ice. It held. She took another step. The harness pulled tight as the wolf's weight followed her. She heard the ice crack. Not the sharp snap of immediate failure, just a warning groan. The sound of something deciding whether to break. "Just a little further," she whispered. To herself or the wolf, she wasn't sure. She made it halfway across before the ice gave way. The water hit like a fist to the chest. Cold beyond cold. Cold that stopped her heart for a full second before it remembered how to beat. She went under the harness, dragging her down as the wolf's weight pulled her toward the creek bed. Her hands found the ice edge. She pulled. Her arms had nothing left. She pulled anyway. Rowan dragged herself onto solid ice water streaming from her clothes, already freezing into a shell against her skin. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue again. The wolf had gone through too, his massive body half submerged in the black water. She had maybe 3 minutes before hypothermia took her ability to think clearly. 5 before her hands stopped working entirely. She pulled, hand over hand, inch by inch. The wolf's fur was waterlogged now, adding another 50 pounds to his weight. Her muscles screamed, her vision tunneled, but she pulled. When she finally got him onto solid ground, she couldn't feel her fingers anymore, couldn't feel her feet. The shaking had progressed from her hands to her whole body, violent tremors that made her movements clumsy and desperate. Fire. She needed fire or they'd both die here. Rowan's emergency kit was still dry, sealed in the waterproof pouch at her belt. Flint and steel. Birch bark tinder. Dry kindling she'd harvested last fall. Her hands shook so badly it took 6 tries to strike a spark. The tinder caught. She fed it carefully, building the flame with twigs, then branches, then larger pieces of deadfall she dragged from beneath the snow. The fire blazed. Heat hit her face like a benediction. She stripped off her frozen clothes, wrung out what water she could, hung them on branches near the flames. Then she turned to the wolf. His breathing had gone raspy. His massive body shook with cold. She didn't think, didn't let herself consider the insanity of what she was about to do. She just lay down beside him, pressed her bare skin against his wet fur, and wrapped her arms around his neck. They lay like that for 15 minutes, long enough for the violent shaking to ease, long enough for her fingers to hurt again, which meant the blood was flowing, long enough to accept that she'd just risked her life for a creature that could tear her apart the moment he woke up. But he didn't wake. His breathing steadied slightly. The ice in his fur began to melt. Rowan pulled her half-dry clothes back on. The fabric was stiff and cold, but better than nothing. She checked the sky. Maybe 2 hours of daylight left. 1.5 miles to the cabin. She could make it if she moved now. She rebuilt the harness and started walking. The 3rd mile passed in a haze of pain and determination. Her knee throbbed where she'd hit the rock. Her shoulders felt like someone had driven nails through the joints. Every breath came hard, the cold air searing her lungs. But she kept moving, 1 foot in front of the other, counting steps because numbers gave her something to focus on besides the pain. 100 steps, 200, 500. The howling started behind her. Rowan froze. The sound came from the direction of the trap, multiple voices joining in a chorus that made her skin prickle with primal fear. Not natural wolves, these were lichen. She'd heard that sound once before the night Pinewood Ridge burned, the night 41 people died. They were tracking, following the blood trail she'd left through the snow. She looked at the unconscious wolf, at the dark smear of crimson marking their path like a road map, at her cabin barely visible through the trees ahead, maybe a 1/4 mile, maybe less. Rowan pulled harder. Her muscles had nothing left to give. She pulled anyway. The harness dug into her shoulders, cutting through her shirt. She felt something tear. Didn't know if it was fabric or skin. Didn't care. The cabin materialized through the snow like a prayer answered. Small, rough, home. She dragged the wolf across the threshold and collapsed against the doorframe, her vision swimming, her lungs burning. Every muscle in her body screamed. Her hands were raw and bleeding where the harness had cut through her gloves. The wolf lay motionless on her floor, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Too shallow. Rowan forced herself upright. Rest could wait. Death wouldn't. Her cabin was 14 feet by 18. A single room with a stone hearth, a narrow bed pushed against the far wall, shelves lined with glass jars and bundles of dried herbs. She'd built this life from nothing after Pinewood Ridge burned. 10 years alone learning to survive in country that killed the unprepared, learning to trust herself because there was no one else to trust. Now a dying lichen took up most of her floor space. She shoved her work table against the wall and knelt beside him, her hands hovering over matted fur. Where to even start? The trap wounds were the most obvious. She could see bone through the mangled flesh of both hind legs. But there were other injuries, older ones, scars that spoke of systematic cruelty. Rowan lit 3 oil lamps and set them around the wolf. The light revealed the full extent of the damage. Her stomach turned. This wasn't battle damage. This was torture. Someone had taken their time, had wanted this creature to know every second of his suffering. She started with the legs, packed the wounds with yarrow to stop the bleeding comfrey to promote healing. Her grandmother had taught her herbalism before the fever took her, before the village elders had called Rowan cursed and sent her into exile. Those lessons were all she had left of the woman who'd raised her. The wolf watched through clouded eyes, tracking her movements by sound and scent, waiting. "You're too calm," Rowan muttered, wrapping the legs with strips torn from her spare blanket. "Injured animals fight. You should be fighting." He didn't. When she probed the wound edges, testing for bone fragments, he only flinched. His massive head remained flat against the floor, those blind eyes never leaving where he thought she was. It unnerved her more than snarling would have. The other injuries revealed themselves as she worked through his fur. 4 parallel gashes across his shoulders, claw marks, deep and deliberate. Bite wounds on his neck positioned to cause pain rather than kill. Someone had held him down, had taken their time, had wanted him to suffer before they left him to die. "Your pack did this," Rowan said softly, cleaning each wound with boiled water and ground golden seal. "Didn't they?" The wolf's ear twitched at the word pack. Something that might have been a growl rumbled in his chest, cut short by pain. She moved to his face. The injuries around his eyes made her hands shake. The tissue was swollen, inflamed, the corneas clouded with a milky film that spoke of recent trauma. Not born blind, made blind. She'd seen this kind of damage before, and the memory made her want to be sick. Who does this to their own? Her voice cracked. She pressed a cool compress against his ruined eyes. The wolf released a sound that was almost a sigh, almost gratitude. The hours bled together. Rowan worked by lamplight, her movements mechanical trained. 22 stitches in the left hind leg, 18 in the right, poultices for the claw marks, salve for the burns around his eyes. She talked while she worked, an old habit formed during long winters alone. "I'm going to stitch this gash on your side now," she said, threading her bone needle with sinew. "It'll hurt, but you know about hurt, don't you?" She pierced skin, felt him tense, but he didn't snap, didn't pull away. "Everything here hurts. The cold hurts. The loneliness hurts. Waking up hurts." The wolf's breathing had changed, slower, deeper, synchronized with hers somehow. "I had a dog once," Rowan continued, "when I was small. His name was Copper. He followed me everywhere, slept at the foot of my bed." She nodded off a stitch and started another. "When the soldiers came, when the fire started, I called for him, kept calling. Even when my mother dragged me down into the root cellar, I kept calling his name." Her hands stilled. The memory rose up sharp and vivid. Smoke, screams, the smell of burning wood, and something worse. Her mother's hand over her mouth. Stay quiet, or we both die." "I never found out what happened to him," she whispered. "My whole family burned, and I'm still looking for a dog that's been dead 12 years. The wolf made a sound low in his throat, not quite a whine, something softer. "Stupid thing to remember, isn't it?" Rowan tied off the final stitch. "The village elders said I was cursed, that the fever that took my ability to bear children was punishment for surviving when others died. They didn't want me in Pinewood Ridge anymore, what was left of it." She sat back, wiping blood from her hands. "So they sent me here, to the Bitterroots, to die probably, but I'm very stubborn about dying." She fetched her last clean blanket and draped it over him, built up the fire until the cabin glowed with warmth. The wolf's breathing had evened out his massive body, finally relaxing into something that might have been sleep. Rowan should sleep too, should rest while she could, but she couldn't bring herself to turn her back on him. Instead, she curled up against the wall knife within reach and watched the rise and fall of his chest. Outside, wind screamed through the Bitterroot Mountains, snow piled against the door, temperature dropping, another storm coming. But inside, for the first time in 10 years, Rowan wasn't alone. The wolf's breathing synchronized with hers, in, out, in, out. Two broken things keeping each other alive through the darkness. She must have dozed off, because she woke to the sound of bones breaking. Rowan jerked upright, knife in hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wolf was convulsing, his massive body twisting, the sound of joints popping out of sockets, reforming bones, lengthening and shrinking all at once. She'd heard stories about this, about the shift, but she'd never seen it. It was horrific. Fur receded into skin. The muzzle shortened, reformed into a human jaw. Paws became hands. The transformation took maybe 30 seconds. It felt like hours. When it finished, a man lay on her floor. Not just any man. He was massive, 7 feet tall easily, corded muscle and scars. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, matted with blood. His face was all sharp angles and brutal beauty. But those eyes, those clouded, ruined eyes that stared unseeing at her ceiling. The scars that ran across them were worse in human form. 4 parallel lines from forehead to cheekbones, silver burns that had melted into the skin. Rowan pressed herself against the wall knife, trembling in her grip. "What are you—" The question came out barely above a whisper. The man's head turned toward her voice. When he spoke, his words came rough, unpracticed, as if he hadn't used human speech in weeks. "Alive, thanks to you. You were a wolf. You're a—" Lycan, he finished. I tried to shift back sooner, but I was too weak. He tried to sit up, failed, fell back with a grunt of pain. Thank you, for not leaving me in that trap. You should have told me what you were. You would have killed me in my sleep. He said it without accusation. Just fact. And he was right. If she'd known what he was, she would have slit his throat that first night. Lycan had killed her family, burned her village, left her orphaned and exiled. Every logical part of her brain was screaming to drive the silver blade into his heart while he was too weak to fight back. But she'd spent 3 days keeping him alive. That had to mean something. "What do you want?" she asked. "Nothing." He turned his face toward the fire's warmth. "I'm a dead man already. My own pack made sure of that. I just needed time to heal enough to shift, to die human instead of animal. You're not dying. I didn't drag you 3.2 miles through a blizzard just to watch you give up." Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "Stubborn about dying. You said that before." He'd been listening. All those hours she'd talked to him thinking he was just a wounded beast. He'd understood every word. Heat crept up her neck. What had she told him? About Copper. About her exile. About, "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. "I know that doesn't mean much coming from me. But it's true. You saved my life when you had every reason not to. I won't repay that with violence." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The storm she'd sensed earlier was arriving. Even if she wanted to throw him out, the weather would kill him before he made it 50 yards. And despite everything, the lies by omission, the fear, the wrongness of harboring a Lycan, she'd spent 3 days keeping him alive. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Garrett." It felt like a lie, or at least not the whole truth. But Rowan had her own secrets. "I'm Rowan." "I know. You told me. Along with your entire life story." This time he definitely smiled. "You talk a lot when you're nervous." "I talk a lot when I'm alone," she corrected, lowering the knife slightly. "Which I was. Until you." "Until me." Garrett shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position. His hand swept out, searching for something to brace against, and found only air. The frustration on his face was raw, unguarded. "I can't see anything. Just shapes. Light and dark." Rowan watched him struggle. This dangerous creature rendered helpless by his injuries. She could kill him now, while he was vulnerable, while he couldn't fight back. Justice for Pinewood Ridge, for her parents, for 41 people who never got to grow old. But when she looked at him sprawled on her floor, fumbling in darkness, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who'd been tortured by his own kind, blinded, left to die alone. She saw herself. "The wall is 2 feet to your left," she said. "Rough stone. You can use it to sit up." His hand found the wall. He pulled himself upright with a grimace, every muscle straining. "Thank you." Rowan kept her distance, ready to run if needed. But Garrett just sat there, breathing hard from the effort, his blind eyes fixed somewhere past her shoulder. In the firelight she could see more scars, dozens of them, old and new, covering his chest and arms. This was a man built for war. "You said you were a soldier," she ventured. "I was. Before the coup." "Coup. My general decided he'd make a better leader. Convinced half the pack to turn on me." He touched the scars across his eyes, wincing. "They held me down, wanted me to suffer, to know I was being replaced before I died. But you didn't die." "No. They left me for the scavengers and the cold. I dragged myself for miles before that trap took me." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "Fitting end, really. Brought down by human steel after surviving my own kind." Rowan studied him. This broken soldier who could probably still kill her with his bare hands, even blind. But he didn't move, didn't threaten, just sat against her wall like he belonged there. "Where's the bed?" he asked suddenly. "Behind you, about 4 feet." Garrett felt along the wall until his hand found the bed frame. "I'll stay on the floor. Wouldn't be right to take your bed." "You're already bleeding on my floor. Might as well bleed on something softer." "I've slept on worse than wood." "So have I. But you're still recovering and I'm not." They argued about it for another 5 minutes. This strange, cautious dance around each other. Finally Garrett relented, hauling himself onto the narrow bed with obvious effort. He took up the entire thing, his feet hanging off the edge. "Garrett." "Yes." "In 3 days, when you're stronger, you need to leave." He was quiet for a long moment. "I understand." Rowan wrapped herself in a blanket and settled against the wall knife within reach. The fire crackled, wind howled, and somewhere in the darkness she heard the distant sound of wolves howling, searching, getting closer. She looked at the man on her bed, at the scars that told a story of betrayal and survival, at the blindness that made him vulnerable and somehow more dangerous for it. "What did you do," she whispered, "to make them hate you this much?" But Garrett's breathing had already evened out into sleep. His face twitched, his lips moved, and then so quietly she almost missed it. Pinewood Ridge. Had to be done. Secure the border. Rowan froze mid-breath. The needle she'd been threading slipped from her fingers. Pinewood Ridge. Her village. Her family. She leaned closer, pulse hammering. "What did you say?" But Garrett had gone silent again, lost in whatever nightmare held him. She told herself she'd misheard, that the name was common, that soldiers talked about many places in their sleep. But her hands trembled as she picked up the fallen needle, and she didn't sleep at all that night, watching him in the firelight, wondering what kind of man she'd dragged out of the snow. The blizzard buried them on the second day. Rowan woke to complete darkness and the sound of Garrett's labored breathing across the cabin. She fumbled for the lamp, struck flint to steel, and watched the small flame catch. The windows were completely covered. Snow pressed against the shutters like a living thing trying to get in. She moved to the door and pushed. It didn't budge. She threw her shoulder against it. Nothing. They were sealed in by 6 feet of snow, maybe more. The storm had intensified overnight weather that could bury a cabin in hours and keep it buried for days. "What's wrong?" Garrett's voice came from the bed alert despite the early hour. "We're snowed in. Door won't open." "How long?" "Could be 3 days. Could be a week." Rowan moved back to the hearth, adding wood to the coals. "We have enough supplies. Firewood will last if we're careful. Water from melted snow, dried venison and root vegetables. We won't starve. Just slowly go mad from cabin fever. Speak for yourself. I've spent entire winters alone in here." But even as she said it, Rowan realized how different it felt now. The walls seemed closer with another person sharing the space, the silence heavier when they weren't talking. For 10 years, solitude had been safety. Now it felt like a trap. Garrett sat up carefully, his hands mapping the space around him. He'd been doing that since he shifted constantly, reaching out, building a picture of the world through touch and sound. It was painful to watch. This man who moved like a warrior reduced to fumbling in darkness. "I can help you," she said before she could stop herself. "Help me what?" "Navigate. You're trying to move like you did before. That won't work. You need a new map." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Show me." Rowan crossed to him, careful to make noise so he'd track her approach. She took his hand. He flinched at the contact but didn't pull away. His palm was rough, calloused from years of weapons training. She guided it to the wall beside the bed. "This is your starting point," she said. "Rough stone, cold to the touch. From here it's 8 steps to the table. Try it." Garrett stood slowly, testing his weight on the injured legs. The wounds had healed faster than they should have, some lichen ability she didn't understand. But he still moved carefully, pain evident in every motion. He counted under his breath as he walked, hand outstretched. His fingers found the table's edge on the 8th step. Something shifted in his expression. Less frustration, More focus. Good, Rowan said. Now from the table to the door is 10 steps, but there's a chair in the way at step 6. You'll feel it with your shin if you're not careful. You could just move the chair. I could, but the world won't rearrange itself for you. She softened the words with a slight smile he couldn't see. Better to learn the obstacles. They spent the morning mapping the cabin, table to door to bed to shelves. Garrett stumbled, often cracked his knee on the chair, nearly put his hand in the fire. But slowly, grudgingly, he began to build a picture in his mind. Rowan watched him count steps under his breath, saw his head tilt to catch sounds she'd never noticed, the creak of floorboards near the hearth, the draft from the poorly sealed window, the different tones of his footsteps on wood versus stone. "The kettle," she said, setting it over the fire. "Listen." Garrett went still, head cocked. At first there was only silence, then a faint rumble as the water began to heat. The rumble became a rattle. The rattle became a whistle. "I hear it," he said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "That's how you know when it's ready. Everything makes sound if you pay attention." By afternoon he could navigate the cabin's perimeter without guidance, not gracefully. He still moved like a man expecting his sight to return any moment, but competently. When he successfully retrieved water from the bucket and returned to the table without incident, Rowan caught the ghost of satisfaction on his face. "Better?" she asked. "Less helpless," he admitted. They fell into an uneasy rhythm. Rowan tended her stores, preparing meals, while Garrett practiced his movements, reinforcing his mental map. The forced proximity made conversation inevitable. At first the words came stilted, careful, but isolation had made them both hungry for company, and gradually the silences filled. "Tell me about your pack," Rowan said that evening, mending a torn shirt while Garrett sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of pine needle tea. His expression shuddered. "Not much to tell. You fought together. That's something." He was quiet for a long moment. "We did. For years. I trusted them with my life. They trusted me with theirs." He turned the mug in his hands, tracking its warmth. "Or so I thought." "What changed?" "Power. It always comes down to power." He took a long drink. "My General Thorne. He decided he could lead better than I could. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd made too many enemies, spilled too much blood. The pack followed him when it mattered." Rowan pulled her thread through fabric. "Not all of them, or you'd be dead. The ones who stayed loyal died defending me. I heard them fall before—" He touched the scars across his eyes. "Before I couldn't hear anything but my own screaming." The rawness in his voice made her chest ache. "I'm sorry. Don't be. I made choices that earned me enemies. Thorne just capitalized on them." He set down the mug. "What about you? You said you were exiled. What did you do to deserve that?" "Got sick." The words came out flat. "There was a fever that went through Pinewood Ridge. Most people recovered. I didn't. Not completely. It left me unable to bear children. The elders said I was cursed, that keeping me would bring bad fortune." She knotted off her thread with more force than necessary. "So they sent me here, to the Bitterroots, to die probably. Superstitious fools. Maybe. But they weren't wrong about the curse. Everyone I've ever loved has died or left me. Maybe I do bring bad fortune." Garrett's hand moved across the table, searching. His fingers found hers and squeezed gently. "You brought me fortune. I should be dead in a frozen ditch. Instead, I'm drinking tea in a warm cabin." Rowan stared at their joined hands. His were massive, scarred, capable of terrible violence, but his touch was careful, almost reverent. "That's a low bar for fortune," she said softly. "When you've been where I've been, any bar above ground is high enough." The days blurred together. Rowan taught Garrett the sound of wind through the shutters that meant another storm was coming. the smell of the stew when it was ready, the number of logs needed to keep the fire burning through the night. He told her stories of battles fought in distant territories, of brotherhood and betrayal, always painting himself as a minor player, just another soldier following orders. She suspected he was editing heavily, but she didn't press. They both had secrets. That's what kept them safe. On the 5th day, the storm finally broke. Rowan dug them out while Garrett listened to her progress from inside, tracking each shovel full by sound. When she finally cleared the door, sunlight spilled across the threshold like a benediction. "We're free," she announced, stamping snow from her boots. Garrett turned from the fire. Something flickered across his face, not relief, almost disappointment. The weeks that followed fell into unexpected comfort. Garrett's legs healed enough that he barely limped. His other injuries reduced to pink scars and fading bruises. He could navigate the cabin flawlessly now, anticipating obstacles before he reached them. He should have been eager to test his strength outside to push toward recovery and eventual departure. Instead, he still asked Rowan to guide him to the table each morning. Still claimed he couldn't quite manage the shelves alone. Still reached for her hand when he moved anywhere unfamiliar. Rowan knew he was pretending. She'd seen him cross the cabin in complete darkness without hesitation when he thought she was asleep. Had watched him catch a mug she'd knocked over before it hit the ground, his reflexes too sharp for someone truly helpless. She said nothing, because somewhere between the blizzard and the thaw she'd started pretending too, that she needed to check his injuries long after they'd healed, that he required her guidance for tasks he'd mastered weeks ago, that the arrangement was necessity rather than choice. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. She didn't want him to leave. "Tell me what's out there," Garrett said one afternoon. They sat at the threshold while she mended a snare. "Describe it." Rowan looked up at the winter landscape. Snow. Trees. More snow. "You're terrible at this." "What do you want me to say?" "It's the bitter roots. Everything is white or gray or dead. Try harder." He tilted his face toward the weak sunlight. "Please." She studied the view with new attention. "The pines are heavy with snow, bent almost double under the weight. There's a raven in the tallest one just sitting there like he's judging us. The sky is that pale gray that comes before more snow, and the wind is making patterns in the drifts, little ripples like frozen water." "Better." Garrett smiled. "What else?" "There are tracks. Rabbit mostly. Something larger too. Maybe elk. And your blood trail is still visible barely. From when I dragged you here." She paused. "It looks like a path now, like the forest is marked by what happened." His smile faded. "Some marks don't fade." "No," she agreed quietly. "They don't." That night, as they prepared dinner, Rowan found herself watching him more closely. The way he moved with unconscious grace despite his blindness, the economy of motion that spoke of years of training, the careful way he handled the knife when chopping vegetables, finding the edge by touch alone. "You're getting better at cooking," she said. "Your standards are painfully low." "My standards are realistic. We're working with dried venison and root vegetables that survived winter. It was never going to be poetry." Garrett laughed, that rough sound she'd grown addicted to hearing. "Fair enough. Though I once had a cook who could make stones taste like heaven." "Once? Where was this?" He went quiet. Rowan realized he'd said too much. Soldiers didn't have personal cooks. That was a luxury for officers, for nobility. At the garrison," he said quickly. "Before the coup, we pooled our pay to hire someone decent." The lie sat badly between them. But Rowan let it pass. They both had secrets. That was the unspoken rule. She woke that night to the sound of her own screaming. The nightmare had been vivid. Flames and claws and her mother's face disappearing into smoke. She sat up, gasping, disoriented, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You're safe." Garrett's voice came from across the cabin. "You're in the cabin. It was just a dream. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to slow her breathing. Sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. I was already awake. She heard him move the creak of the bed footsteps approaching. May I sit? Rowan nodded, then remembered. Yes. He settled beside her on the floor, leaving careful space between them. They sat like that for a while, listening to the fire pop and settle. Outside, something howled in the distance. Real wolves, not the shape-shifting kind. The nightmares, Garrett said finally. Are they always about Pinewood Ridge? Usually. Sometimes they're about after. The fever, the exile, the first winter here when I almost didn't make it. She pulled her blanket tighter. What about you? You have them too. I hear you sometimes. Mine are about the coup, the moment I realized my own pack was turning on me. His voice went distant. I keep trying to fight differently, to change the outcome, but it always ends the same way, held down. The knife, the pain, the darkness. I'm sorry. Don't be. I earned those nightmares. He said it with such conviction that Rowan turned to look at him. In the firelight, his face was all sharp shadows and harder truths. I've done things, Rowan, things that haunt me for good reason. We've all done things we regret. Not like this. He shook his head. You see good in me because I've been helpless. But when I'm healed, when I'm strong again, I'll be what I was before. And what I was before wasn't good. Rowan reached out slowly, giving him time to hear her movement, and took his hand. I don't believe that. I've seen you angry, frustrated, at your worst. You've never once raised a hand to me, never threatened, never demanded. She squeezed his fingers. Whatever you were before, you're choosing to be different now. Because I'm blind and broken. Because I need you. Is that so terrible, needing someone? The question hung between them. Garrett's thumb traced circles on her palm, the touch absent and electric all at once. I've spent my whole life being needed, he said quietly, for my strength, my strategy, my willingness to make hard choices. But I've never needed anyone before. Not like this. He turned toward her, those clouded eyes almost meeting hers. It terrifies me. Me too, Rowan whispered. They sat in silence, hands joined the fire burning low between comfort and something more dangerous. Finally Rowan spoke again. Garrett, when you leave, her voice cracked, when you're healed enough to go, will you just disappear? Or will you say goodbye? His arms came around her, pulling her close. I don't know if I can leave. You have to eventually. The Bitterroots aren't safe for your kind, and you need to... I need to stay right here. He buried his face in her hair. I need to pretend the world outside doesn't exist. I need to believe that this cabin and you and these stolen moments are all there is. That's not realistic. I know. His voice broke on the words. Gods, I know. But for tonight, can we pretend? So they did. They sat together until dawn painted the windows gray, speaking in whispers about nothing and everything. Rowan told him about the garden she wanted to plant when spring came. Garrett described constellations she'd never learned the names for. They talked until words ran out, and then they just existed together in comfortable silence. When sunlight finally filled the cabin, Garrett pulled back reluctantly, his face turned toward the window, toward light he could barely perceive. Rowan saw something shift in his expression. What is it? She asked. Nothing. But his hand went to his eyes, touching the scars there with a frown. I thought I saw something. But that's impossible. Rowan's stomach dropped. Your sight is coming back. No, it can't be. The damage was too severe. But they both knew what it meant. His healing was accelerating. Soon he'd be strong enough to shift fully, to run, to return to whatever life waited beyond the Bitterroots. Their borrowed time was running out. The howling started 3 nights later, distant and haunting across the frozen wasteland. Rowan woke to the sound, her body going rigid against Garrett's warmth. His arm tightened around her, but he said nothing. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Yes. Wolves. Real ones? Or lichen?" The word came out flat. "My kind." Rowan sat up, pulling the blanket around herself. Through the window, moonlight painted the snow in shades of silver and shadow. "Are they hunting?" "Searching." Garrett's voice had changed, taken on an edge she hadn't heard before. "For me, probably. Thorn would want to confirm I'm dead." "Then we stay quiet. Keep the fire low. They'll pass through and they won't pass through." He swung his legs out of bed, moving with sudden purpose toward the window. "They'll search every structure, every cave, every possible shelter. It's what any good tracker would do." Rowan watched him stand at the window, his posture rigid. "Garrett, you can't see the forest from here." "I can hear them, smell them on the wind." But his eyes were focused outward with too much precision for a blind man. The howls came again, closer now. Multiple voices joining in a chorus that made Rowan's skin prickle with primal fear. She'd heard wolves before, but this was different. This was organized, purposeful. This was a hunting party. "How many?" she asked. "At least 18, maybe more." Garrett's hands curled into fists against the windowsill. "A full search party." "Are you in danger?" "We're both in danger." He turned to face her, and for the first time his blind eyes seemed to look directly at her. "If they find me here, find you with me. Humans who shelter lichen are considered traitors to their own kind, and lichen who flee their pack during a coup are considered cowards. Neither of us comes out of this well." Rowan rose, wrapping herself in a thick shawl. "Then we need a plan. Can you shift run before they get here?" "I could." Something in his tone suggested he wouldn't. "But leaving you here alone when a pack is hunting nearby would be suicide for you. They'd smell me all over this cabin, all over you." The last words came out rough. Heat crept up Rowan's neck as she realized what he meant. They'd shared a bed for warmth. His scent would be everywhere. "So, what do we do?" she asked. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made her blood run cold. "You could turn me in. Tell them you found an injured wolf, didn't realize what I was until I shifted. They might spare you." "I'm not turning you in." "Rowan." "No." She crossed to him, took his face in her hands. "I'm not handing you over to the people who blinded you and left you to die. That's not who I am." His hands came up to cover hers, and she felt them trembling. "You don't understand what they'll do if they find us together." "Then help me understand. Stop hiding things from me." She searched his face, saw the war playing out behind his features. "There's something you're not telling me. Something more than just being a soldier caught in a coup." Garrett's eyes, those supposedly blind eyes, met hers with perfect focus for just a heartbeat before he caught himself and looked away. But Rowan had seen it. The clarity. The awareness. "You can see me," she breathed. He went perfectly still. "How long?" When he didn't answer, her voice hardened. "How long have you been able to see Rowan? Don't lie to me. Not about this." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "When did your sight come back?" The silence stretched until it became its own answer. "Weeks," he finally admitted. "It started coming back in fragments weeks ago, blurry at first, just shapes. But gradually, you've been lying to me." Her voice came out flat. "Every day, every touch, every time I asked about your eyes, you lied. I was trying to protect what we had. Protect you thought deceit was better." Rowan's hands shook with anger and something sharper. Betrayal. "Thought I wouldn't notice you staring at things you claimed you couldn't see." Outside, the howls grew closer, multiple voices calling and answering. The search party was maybe 2 miles away now, maybe less. "What else are you lying about?" she asked. "Is Garrett even your real name?" His head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing like a wolf scenting its pack. And in that moment Rowan saw the truth written across his face. The military bearing, the way he'd assessed threats, the personal cook, the strategic mind. "That's what I thought," she said bitterly. "You're not who you say you are at all." The howls erupted again, so close now that Rowan could hear individual voices in the chorus. One rose above the others, deeper, commanding, an alpha calling his pack to order. Garrett's whole body went rigid. "No," he whispered. "What?" "That's Thorn. He's leading the hunt himself." Garrett moved back to the window, his movements predatory now, the pretense of blindness completely gone. "He never does that unless the target is valuable. So he knows you're alive." "Possibly. Or he's being thorough." His jaw clenched. "Either way, we're running out of time." The wolves circled closer as dawn approached. Rowan stood at the window, silver knife in hand, watching shadows move between the trees. 18 of them, maybe more. Massive forms that were too large to be natural wolves. They moved with purpose, with intelligence, sweeping through the forest in a coordinated search pattern. And at the center of the pack, a wolf larger than the others. Gray as storm clouds, with eyes that gleamed even in the pre-dawn darkness. "That's him," Garrett said quietly. He stood beside her now, no longer pretending he couldn't see. "General Thorn." The gray wolf stopped at the edge of the clearing. Its massive head turned toward the cabin. For a long moment nothing moved. Then it threw back its head and howled. Not a hunting call this time. A summons. Garrett's whole body trembled. Rowan watched in horror as his form seemed to shimmer, as if his human shape was barely containing something wild beneath. "Garrett, don't. I'm not shifting." But his voice came strained. "Gods, it's hard not to answer. An alpha's call is almost impossible to resist. You're resisting, though. That has to mean something." "It means I'm a traitor. To my kind, to my pack, to everything I was supposed to be." He looked at her then, and Rowan saw anguish etched across his features. "It means I'm choosing you over them, and that choice might kill us both." The pack didn't attack immediately. They circled the cabin once, twice, their massive forms casting shadows across the snow. Then, as the sun touched the eastern mountains, they retreated into the forest. But they didn't leave. Rowan could feel them out there, waiting, watching. "They'll come back tonight," Garrett said. "Thorn's testing us, seeing if I'll run, if I'll answer his call." "Will you?" He turned to face her fully. In the morning light she could see his eyes clearly now, golden, piercing, fully functional. "No," even though staying might mean death, especially because of that. He crossed to where she stood, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. "I've spent my whole life running toward death, toward battle, toward war, toward choices that cost lives. Maybe it's time I stood still for something worth dying for." Rowan's grip tightened on the knife. "Don't make me your redemption, Garrett. Whatever you're running from, whatever you've done that's not fair. I'm not asking you to redeem me." His hand lifted, hovering near her face, but not touching. "I'm asking you to let me stand with you when they come. You still haven't told me who you really are." "I know. Are you going to?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He turned around and pulled his shirt over his head. There, burned into his left shoulder blade, was a mark. A wolf's head, jaws open in a snarl, surrounded by a crown of thorns. The royal seal of the Lycan territories. She'd seen it before years ago on wanted posters in the last human settlement she'd visited before exile. On proclamations of war. On the shields of soldiers who'd burned villages. Rowan's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the sound that wanted to escape. "You're not just a soldier," she whispered. "You're not even just an alpha." Garrett pulled his shirt back on, but he didn't turn to face her. "No. You're the king. The Lycan king." Her mind raced, reframing every conversation through this new lens. That's why Thorn led a coup. That's why he's hunting you personally. You're not Garrett the soldier, you're Garrett Lyon, Alpha King of the Yukon Territories. His voice came flat. Or I was before Thorn took everything. The cabin felt too small suddenly, too close. Rowan backed away, the knife trembling in her grip. You lied about everything. Not everything. The torture was real. The betrayal was real. My feelings for you are... He stopped himself. But yes, I lied about who I was. Why? Because you would have killed me if you knew. He finally turned those golden eyes, finding hers. A soldier caught in a coup. That's sympathetic. But a kings make the decisions that cost lives. Kings order attacks. Kings... His voice cracked. Kings burn villages to secure their borders. The words hit her like a physical blow. Rowan felt the cabin tilt, felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What did you say? Garrett's face had gone ashen. Rowan, What did you say? I need to tell you something. About Pinewood Ridge. The knife fell from her hand. She didn't remember dropping it, didn't remember backing against the wall. All she could hear was the roaring in her ears and Garrett's voice speaking words that unmade her world. I was 23 when it happened. Young for a king. Paranoid about the borders. Human settlements were expanding into what I considered Lycan territory. He spoke quickly now, the words pouring out like poison from a wound. Pinewood Ridge was strategically positioned, too close to our hunting grounds. My advisors suggested we send a message, something that would make other settlements think twice about expansion. No. The word came out barely above a whisper. I approved the raid, gave the order myself. No survivors. Make it quick. Make it thorough. His hands curled into fists. I never visited the site, never asked about details. It was just a mark on a map to me, a tactical decision, 41 casualties that secured a border. Rowan's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, her vision swimming. You gave the order. Yes. My parents, Sarah and Thomas Ash. My neighbors, the children, 41 people. Her voice rose. You murdered them. Yes. She looked at him standing there in her cabin. The man she'd saved, the man she'd nursed back to health, the man she'd fallen in love with. And all she could see was fire. Smoke. Her mother's face as she descended into the root cellar for the last time. Get out. Rowan. Get out. She lunged for the knife, grabbed it, pointed it at him with shaking hands. Get out of my cabin. Get out of my sight. Get out before I... The door burst open. 18 wolves poured into the clearing. The gray wolf Thorn shifted mid-stride, bones cracking and reforming until a man stood where the beast had been. He was tall, battle-scarred, with silver threading through his dark hair. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. Well, Thorn said, his voice carrying across the snow. Isn't this touching? More wolves shifted, men and women all bearing weapons, all surrounding the cabin with military precision. Rowan's knife suddenly felt very small in her hand. Hello, my king. Thorn continued, the title dripping with mockery. Or should I call you Garrett, now I hear that's what you've been going by? Garrett stepped into the doorway, placing himself between Thorn and Rowan. You should have stayed away, Thorn. Let the mountain take what you couldn't finish. And let you hide in this hovel forever. Let you play house with a human. Thorn's gaze slid past Garrett to Rowan. Though I admit I didn't expect to find you shacked up with a survivor of your own massacre. That's a new low even for you. She has nothing to do with this. Let her go. Nothing to do with this? Thorn laughed. She's been harboring a fugitive, sheltering the deposed king. That makes her very much a part of this. He addressed Rowan directly. Do you know who you've been warming your bed with, girl? I know, Rowan said, her voice steadier than she felt. Do you know that Garrett Lyon, the merciful king as he liked to call himself, burned 17 villages? that he executed prisoners rather than negotiate ransoms, that his tactical brilliance was really just a willingness to sacrifice anyone who stood in his way. I know what he is. Thorne's eyebrows rose. And yet you sheltered him anyway. Touching. Stupid, but touching. He gestured to his pack. These are the loyalists who followed me when I took the throne. The ones who agreed that Garrett's reign had become too brutal, too costly. We offered him a clean death, you know, a warrior's end. But he ran like a coward. You blinded him, Rowan spat. Tortured him. We gave him what he'd given to countless others, suffering before death. Call it poetic justice. Thorne's smile widened. But it seems the death part didn't take. So here we are. Garrett's hands curled into fists. You want me, Thorne, fine. I'll come willingly. Just let her walk away. Oh, I don't think so. Thorne began to circle his pack, moving with him. You see, we have a problem. You've been here for weeks playing the wounded soldier, seducing this poor girl. And now she knows our secrets. Knows the Lycan King still lives. That makes her a liability. Rowan felt ice slide down her spine. I won't tell anyone. Your word means nothing human. Thorne stopped, his eyes glittering. But I'll make you an offer anyway. A kindness really, considering what you've done. He pointed at Garrett. This man destroyed your village. I can see it in your face the way you look at him. You know what he took from you. He let that sink in, then continued. Watch him die. Justice for your murdered family, and we'll let you live. Refuse, and you die with him. Choose quickly. Rowan's mind raced. She could accept. Could watch Garrett the Lycan King, who destroyed her world, die at the hands of his own kind. It would be justice. It would be right. She'd spent 12 years wanting someone to pay for Pinewood Ridge. But when she looked at him standing in the doorway with his shoulders squared and his eyes fixed on Thorne, she didn't see the king who'd ordered atrocities. She saw the man who'd learned to navigate her cabin by counting steps, who'd held her through nightmares, who'd chosen her over his pack when the Alpha called. No, she said. Thorne's expression hardened. Foolish girl. I said no. Rowan stepped up beside Garrett, silver knife raised. If you want him, you go through me. For the first time, Garrett looked at her with his fully restored sight, really looked at her, taking in every detail in the cold morning light. Rowan saw recognition flash across his face, saw the full weight of her heartbreak, the betrayal that lived in her eyes, even as she stood to defend him. Rowan, don't, he said hoarsely. I'm not worth this. Probably not, but it's my choice. Thorne's smile turned feral. As you wish. The attack came in a rush of fur and fangs. Wolves leaped from all sides. Garrett shifted mid-motion, his human form exploding into something massive and black. He met the first attacker head-on, jaws closing around a throat. Blood sprayed across snow steam rising in the cold air. Rowan slashed with her silver knife, catching a wolf across the muzzle. It yelped and retreated, but 3 more took its place. She backed toward the cabin blade, flashing, barely keeping them at bay. The smell of blood and wet fur filled her nostrils. Garrett fought like something unleashed. All the careful gentleness he'd shown her stripped away to reveal the warrior beneath. He was brutal, efficient, devastating. But he was 1 against 18, and even a king could be overwhelmed. Every time a wolf lunged toward Rowan, Garrett broke from his own fights to intercept, leaving himself open. Taking bites to his shoulders, his flanks, protecting her at the cost of his own defense. Blood matted his black fur, his movements growing slower. Thorne remained in human form, circling the chaos with a long silver blade. You fight well for a dead king, he called over the snarling. But you're protecting her. That makes you vulnerable. He was right. And Thorne saw it too, saw the weakness. The general moved with sudden speed, his blade arcing not toward Garrett, but toward Rowan's exposed back. Rowan saw Thorne's reflection in the cabin window, a heartbeat too late. She turned, knowing she couldn't dodge in time, knowing the silver blade would find her heart. But Garrett was faster. He shifted mid-leap, his human form intercepting the strike. The blade buried itself deep in his chest, right where his heart beat. Garrett gasped, his hand closing around the silver blade even as it burned his flesh. The smell of seared skin filled the air. "No!" Rowan screamed. Garrett looked down at the blade protruding from his chest, then up at Thorne. Blood bubbled at his lips when he smiled. "Bad form, General. Going for the human when you wanted me." Thorne tried to pull the blade free, but Garrett held it fast, his hand burning skin blackening. "Let go, you fool! The silver is killing you." "I know." Garrett's other hand shot out, grabbing Thorne by the throat. "But I'm taking you with me." The other wolves froze, uncertain. Their general was being choked by a dying king, and none knew whether to attack or retreat. Thorne's face purpled, his eyes bulging. Rowan dropped her knife and rushed to Garrett's side as his legs buckled. She caught him as he fell, the silver blade sliding free with a wet sound that made her stomach turn. Thorne stumbled back, gasping for air, hand at his throat, coughing. "Rowan." Garrett breathed, his eyes finding hers, golden and clear and filled with regret. "I'm sorry. For everything. For Pinewood Ridge. For lying. For—" "Save it." She pressed her hands to the wound, but blood poured between her fingers, hot and slick. Silver poisoning. It would kill him in minutes. "You're not dying. I won't let you." "Not your choice." He reached up with a shaking hand and touched her face, leaving a streak of blood on her cheek. "But thank you for trying to save me again." Thorne recovered murder in his eyes. "Finish them both." He commanded his pack, his voice raspy. The wolves closed in a ring of fangs and death. Rowan held Garrett's body, her silver knife beyond reach, and waited for the end. But it didn't come. A new howl split the air, deeper, older, carrying authority that made every wolf freeze mid-step. From the forest emerged a white wolf, ancient and massive, flanked by 24 others bearing scars that spoke of countless battles. Thorne's face went ashen. "Elder Moira, this doesn't concern the council." The white wolf shifted into an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes like storm clouds. "A coup against the rightful king always concerns the council, Thorne. Did you think we wouldn't notice that your ambition could hide in these frozen wastes?" He was weak, unfit to rule. "That was not your judgment to make." Moira's gaze swept the scene, taking in Garrett bleeding in Rowan's arms, the scattered bodies, the fear in Thorne's loyalists. "You have violated every law of succession, and for that you will answer to the council." Her pack surged forward. Thorne's wolves scattered rather than face the elder's wrath, disappearing into the trees. Thorne himself shifted and ran, but 3 council wolves gave chase, their howls echoing through the forest. In seconds the clearing was empty except for Rowan Garrett and the white wolf. Moira knelt beside them, her ancient eyes assessing Garrett's wound. "Silver through the heart. He has minutes, maybe less." "Save him," Rowan begged. "Please." "I cannot. I am no healer, and silver poison has no cure." The elder looked at Rowan with something like pity. "But you are a healer. Yes, I can smell the herbs on your skin." "Not for this. I don't know how to—" "Then he dies." Moira held her gaze. "Unless you're willing to pay a price." Rowan's breath caught. "What price?" "Your life force bound to his. It might dilute the poison enough for him to survive. But you'll be connected forever. Feel his pain, share his wounds. And if he dies, so do you." Garrett's hand gripped Rowan's arm weakly. "Don't bind yourself to a dying man." "You're not dying, not if I can help it." Rowan looked at Moira. "Do it." The ritual was brief and brutal. Moira spoke words in a language older than kingdoms, pressing her palm to Rowan's chest and then to Garrett's wound. Light flared between them, not warm, but cold as starlight, cold as the mountain air. Rowan felt something tear loose inside her, felt it flow outward and wrap around Garrett's fading heartbeat. The pain hit her like a physical blow, silver fire burning through her veins, her chest constricting, her breath coming in desperate gasps. She tasted copper, smelled burned flesh. She collapsed beside Garrett, their hands finding each other instinctively. "What?" she managed. "You feel what he feels now," Moira said. His poison is yours, but divided between two it's survivable, barely. The agony stretched for hours, or minutes. Rowan couldn't tell. She was dimly aware of being carried into the cabin of blankets wrapped around both of them, of Moira's voice giving instructions to someone. Then everything faded to gray. When Rowan woke, dawn light was streaming through the window. Her chest ached with a deep, bone-weary pain, but the sharp silver burn had faded to something manageable. She turned her head and found Garrett beside her, his eyes open and watching. "You're awake," he said quietly. "So are you." She tried to sit up and gasped as phantom pain lanced through her chest. "Don't move. The binding is still settling." Garrett's hand found hers. "You feel it too, don't you? The wound." "Yes." Rowan took a careful breath. "Moira said we're connected now. Share wounds, share pain. She also said you were insane for doing it." I'm inclined to agree. Outside she could hear movement, wolves in human form setting up some kind of camp. "Your pack is waiting," she said. "The council's pack, technically. Moira brought them to restore order." Garrett's expression darkened. "They're waiting for me to decide what happens next." "You mean whether you reclaim your throne?" "Yes." Rowan pulled her hand away. "Before you decide, there's something you should know. About when I found the seal." Garrett went still. "What about it?" "I didn't just find it this week. I've known who you were for almost a month." The confession hung between them. "You knew," Garrett finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "And you said nothing. I tried to hate you for it. Stood over you with a knife more than once." She met his eyes. "But I couldn't reconcile the man who destroyed my village with the man who counted steps to avoid my furniture, who asked permission before touching me, who chose me over his pack. So what was this past month? Some kind of test? Maybe. Or maybe I was trying to understand how both versions of you could exist in the same person." Rowan pulled her knees to her chest, careful of the residual pain. "The king who burned Pinewood Ridge was 23 and terrified and trying to prove himself. The man in my cabin was broken and humble and learning to be gentle. Neither of them is a lie, Garrett. They're both you. And which one are you bound to now? Which one did you save?" "I don't know. That's your choice to make." She gestured toward the window, toward the waiting wolves. "Moira's out there ready to restore you. Thorn will face justice for the coup. Your throne is waiting. You could go back to being the Lycan king." She paused. "Or you abdicate. Give up the crown. Live as a common man. Spend your life trying to repair some of what you broke." Garrett rose, carefully testing his healing wound. He crossed to the window and looked out at the assembled wolves. Rowan could see Moira standing among them, patient and ancient and waiting. "If I go back," he said quietly, "I'll be expected to lead, to make decisions that cost lives, to be the king they need, not the man I want to be." "Yes." "And if I abdicate, I lose everything. My pack, my authority, my purpose. Everything I've built my identity around for 15 years. "Yes." Rowan joined him at the window. "But you'd be free. Free to choose who you want to become instead of being trapped by who you were." Garrett looked at her, those golden eyes searching her face. "Would you forgive me?" "Eventually." "No," she said honestly. "I don't think I can forgive what happened to Pinewood Ridge. My parents deserve more than forgiveness given because I've developed feelings for their killer." "Then why offer this at all? Why bind yourself to someone you can't forgive?" Rowan touched her chest, feeling the echo of his heartbeat through the binding. "Because forgiveness and love aren't the same thing. I can't absolve what you did, but I can choose to help you become someone different, someone better." She held his gaze. "That's not mercy, Garrett. It's justice. Making you live with what you've done while trying to atone for it. Making you face every day knowing you can never undo the past. Only try to make a different future. That's a cruel kind of justice. It's the only kind I have to offer." She stepped back. So choose. The crown and everything it represents, or abdication and a life spent trying to earn something you'll never fully deserve. Both paths are hard. I won't tell you which one to take. Garrett turned back to the window, watching as Moira began walking toward the cabin. His hands gripped the windowsill, knuckles white. "If I abdicate," he said finally, "what happens to the territories?" "Moira will appoint a new ruler, someone chosen by the council, someone who won't repeat your mistakes or Thorne's ambitions. And I become no one. You become Garrett, just Garrett, a man trying to make amends in whatever small ways he can." The elder reached the door and knocked. 3 solid strikes that echoed through the cabin. Garrett looked at Rowan one more time. "If I choose abdication," he asked, "will you teach me how to be just a man? How to build something instead of destroy?" "I'll try, but I can't promise it won't be hard. Can't promise we won't break each other worse than we already are." "I know." He took a shaking breath. "But I've spent my whole life breaking things. Maybe it's time I learned to build." Garrett opened the door. Moira stood on the threshold, her ancient eyes knowing. "Elder," Garrett said formally, "I invoke the right of abdication. I renounce my crown, my title, and my claim to rule. Let the council appoint another." Moira's expression didn't change, but Rowan caught the flash of approval in her eyes. "You understand what this means. You'll be cast out from the pack, stripped of rank and privilege. You'll live as a common wolf without protection or status." "I understand." "And where will you go?" Garrett glanced back at Rowan. "Wherever she'll have me. For however long she'll tolerate me." The elder looked between them, seeing the binding that tied them, the complicated tangle of history and hurt, and something that might eventually become healing. "So be it." Moira placed her hand over Garrett's heart. "By the authority of the council, I strip you of your crown. You are no longer king. You are Garrett Lyon, unbonded and unclaimed. May you find the redemption you seek." Light flared one more time. The binding pulsed between them. His crown dissolved, and Rowan felt the weight lift not from her, but from him. Freedom tasted like winter air. Garrett stumbled, and she caught him, steadying him. "It's done," he whispered. "Yes." The elder nodded once and turned back to her pack. Within the hour they were gone, taking Thorne in chains, his howls of protest fading into the forest, leaving Rowan and Garrett alone in the clearing. They stood together in the doorway, watching the last wolves disappear into the forest. The Bitterroot Mountains stretched around them, vast and empty and unforgiving. "What now?" Garrett asked. Rowan considered. The cabin behind them was small, barely enough for one person, let alone 2. Spring would come, eventually bringing new challenges. And between them lay 12 years of grief that wouldn't disappear just because a crown had been renounced. But they were alive. And they had chosen each other. Not out of forgiveness or absolution, but out of something harder. A commitment to face what came next together. "Now we survive," Rowan said. "We plant that garden when the ground thaws. We figure out how 2 broken people share a space without destroying each other. We take it one day at a time. That's all just survival." "Just survival," she confirmed. "And maybe if we're very lucky we learn how to carry the weight of the past without letting it crush us." Garrett took her hand, lacing their scarred fingers together. Through the binding she felt his fear and hope and determination mixing with her own pain and doubt and fragile trust. "I don't deserve this chance," he said. "No," she agreed. "But you're getting it anyway. Don't waste it." They turned together and walked back into the cabin, leaving the door open to let in the winter air. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and clean, covering the blood-stained ground. It would take more than snow to erase what had happened here, but it was a start. And sometimes, Rowan thought, as she and Garrett began the careful work of existing in the same space, a start was enough. Not forgiveness, not absolution. Just 2 people choosing every day to try. 6 months passed like the slow thaw of spring. Garrett stood in the clearing where Pinewood Ridge had burned, hammer in one hand, chisel in the other. 41 stones. He'd quarried them himself from the mountain, carried them down one by one. Each weighed 50 pounds. Pennants measured in granite and sweat. The first stone was already carved Sarah Ashe, beloved mother, Thomas Ashe, beloved father. Rowan watched from the tree line, arms crossed. She didn't help, didn't offer comfort. This was his burden to carry. "The letters are crooked," she called. "I know." Garrett's hands were raw, bleeding from where the chisel had slipped. "I'm not a stonemason." "Then do it again." He did, 3 times before the letters satisfied her. Then he moved to the second stone. Margaret Chen, age 8. A woman emerged from the forest. 60s gray hair, face lined with years and loss. One of the 9 survivors Rowan had contacted. She stopped 10 feet from Garrett, staring at the stones. "You're him," she said. Not a question. Garrett set down his tools, stood. "Yes, ma'am." "You killed my husband, my son." "I gave the order." "Yes." Her hand trembled. She could hit him, spit on him. He'd accept either. Instead, she knelt beside the first stone, traced her fingers over Sarah's name. "She was my friend," the woman whispered. "We canned preserves together every autumn." "I'm sorry," Garrett said. The words were ash in his mouth. Worthless. "I can't undo what I did. But I can." "You can keep carving." She stood, wiped her eyes. "All 41, and when you're done you plant trees, one for each name." She walked away without looking back. Garrett picked up the chisel. His hands shook, but he kept carving. Rowan stepped from the trees, stood beside him, didn't touch him, just stood there while he worked the binding, humming quietly between them like a second heartbeat. "Not forgiveness," she said. "No," he agreed. "But maybe a start." The chisel bit into stone. The letters formed slowly, imperfectly, honestly. Sweat dripped into his eyes. Blood from his split knuckles stained the granite. But he didn't stop. And in the clearing where 41 people had died, something small and green began to grow between the stones. New grass. Wildflowers pushing through thawing earth. Life reclaiming what fire had taken. The bitter roots would remember. The stones would stand. And 2 broken people would carry their ghosts together until the earth claimed them both. That would have to be enough.